Hey everyone, I hope you're having a fantastic day. My name is Hamilton Winters, and I'm the host of this podcast series called Inneractions. Today, I couldn't be more excited to bring you the first episode of Season 2. Season 2, can you believe it already? Season 1 was incredible. And if you haven't been tracking along with us to just revisit our purpose, here at Inneractions, we are here to do three things. One, we're here to provoke thought and conversation on meaningful topics. Two, we're here to provide a platform for others to share their stories with us so that we can have the experiences that they've had through association. And finally, to promote the kingdom of God through stories of His grace. Now, if you haven't listened to any of the other episodes, I challenge you to go back. Some of the topics that we hit were really meaningful. Of the 16, I'll list them off: development, simplicity, trust, acceptance, faith, timing, discipline, purpose, risk, commitment, value, reputation, identity, contentment, gratitude, and chance. Now, if any of those stick out to you, go back and take a listen. Now, this season, we hope to bring you 16 more meaningful topics as well, with 16 different stories just like those. Today, Russell and I are so excited to bring you a story from my friend, John Dilworth, on the topic of motivation. John talks about not only how motivation has affected his life, but how that word, motivation, has been his purpose word moving forward for other people as well. Thanks for joining us for Season 2, Episode 1. Here's John Dilworth on motivation. John, what's up, man?
Oh, man, it's a lot up, so just kind of taking it day by day.
Well, good. We're glad you're here. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for the invite. I appreciate you having me.
Absolutely. I couldn't think of anybody better. You know, Trevor Smith is the one that recommended that you come on the show. So shout out to Trevor.
What's up, Trevor? Man. Thanks for the recommendation. Thanks for the nod.
Absolutely. He was like, man, you need to have John on the show. And it was a no-brainer. You ever just...
Well, I think that's kind of a... I take that statement as an honor. Those are very, very high comments, so I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, you're very deserving. And today we're talking about motivation. John is one of the most motivating, inspirational people that I have ever had the opportunity to come in contact with. And before we just start, why don't we do this? Why don't you just explain a little bit about yourself and how you and I became acquainted with each other, because it's a pretty special story.
Yeah, no, it really is. So I'm Atlanta native. I'm from the south side of the city, College Park, Clayton County. But throughout my, I guess, life transitions, I found myself from, being Clayton County, College Park, Henry County, and now I'm living in the Buckhead area. Buckhead area is very inspirational in and of itself, very motivational in and of itself. And one thing I like about being in this area is that the people that I encounter, they tend to have a common hustle, so to speak. Everybody is trying to accomplish something. And that's something I really appreciate. And part of my Buckhead list of amazing people I've met is you, Mr. Hamilton Winters. And I think that with you being, kind of the way you are, when I initially met you, it was, I felt like I kind of bumped into somebody from The Great Gatsby or something, because your personality is very unique, but it's very authentic. So, Trevor, myself, a few really good friends, we were all just hanging out, and it was by the pool, but it was a little chilly outside. There's a fireplace. We're in the common area of this beautiful building in the middle of Buckhead, and cigars and, the conversation just brought us together. Mm-hmm. And I think that was the first day of many, but I know there'll be many more, because meeting you, meeting Trevor, meeting Trevor's wife, it was a major blessing for me.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for your kind words. I feel the same way about you and every run-in that we've had, whether it be at the residences Buckhead or at Davidoff, which is a place that you frequent.
Absolutely.
Which is great. Davidoff of Geneva, Cigar Lounge. Cigar Lounge.
Yeah.
So we've had a fantastic time with John and with his friends, acquaintances. You surround yourself with fantastic people. And I always count myself fortunate if I'm one of those people that you have chosen to surround yourself with. But anybody that I've met through you has also been of great quality. So I think, where do you find your friends from?
I think that that hustle that I talked about that kind of connects us. That's where I find my friends. In the midst of me really pursuing my dreams, me trying to lead as an example, me trying to motivate others. In the middle of all of that activity is kind of where the cohesiveness just organically grows out of the relationships I make along the way. And it's interesting because most of the friends that I have, I've met them over probably the last 6 or 7 years.
Yeah.
It's not like all of my friends are the guys I per se grew up with or I've known for 20 years. A lot of the people that I associate with now are people who are relatively new in my life, but it gives me that ability to kind of hand pick what kind of energy I surround myself with instead of just accepting, whatever the status quo may be.
Absolutely. You are the average of your 5 closest friends.
Absolutely.
And if that's the truth, which I 100% believe that it is, you got a pretty good batting average as far as I'm concerned. From what we've talked about, you just spoke about your journey from the south side of the city to Buckhead, which for those of you that don't live in Atlanta, that's a massive transition.
It is. I think that we've got a society that we live in where you have the freedom to make choices, but at the same time, your environment is a very intricate part of your early development, right? And so when you merge in your ability to make choices with the choice you don't have, which is your early environment, one's got to eventually outweigh the other. For me, I think the choices that I made along the way have really made a huge difference. I remember I was 23, about to be 24, and I was living in Clayton County in my mom's house, my parents' house, and I really was not doing a whole lot of progression in my life. And this opportunity came about for me to go and work as a civilian overseas in Iraq during the Operation Iraqi Freedom. And most of the people that I knew at the time thought I was crazy to not be in the military and not be forced to go, but to go over here to the middle of a war zone. But that choice is one of the choices that I look back on, and I think that was one of the pivotal moments where I was able to transition from, being John from the south side of Atlanta to John who's got global experiences. And I think, choosing to make the choice outweigh the environment is kind of how I transitioned to where I am now.
That's good. You and I spoke at a master's watch party a couple of weeks ago about your decision to go to Qatar.
Yeah. Qatar was a very eye-opening experience. I was living in Iraq, and I had paved the way. I'll use that term. I'd paved the way for my she's my ex-wife now, but my wife at the time, one of her family members, one of my friends from College Park, had all kind of followed me over to Iraq. It was a chance to change our lives, and I had this feeling of leadership, and I remember God telling me, because God has spoken to me on a very few occasions in my life where I know it was God speaking to me. I remember God saying, go to Kuwait. It just 3 words, go to Kuwait. And when I heard this, I said, okay, let me be obedient. This is, maybe our next level step. And I called my buddy who I was thinking was living in Kuwait at the time and working in Kuwait. And so I called him. He said, hey, man, how you doing? It's good to hear from you. I said, man, I'm trying to make a way for myself and my wife and my friends here to transition to Kuwait. He said, well, I'm in Doha, Qatar, and my roommate is the head of IT out here. I was, this was early in my technology career. Mm-hmm. My roommate is the head of technology out here. He'll hire you right now, man, and you can just come here instead. Mm-hmm. And without even really thinking about the decision I was making, I found myself headed to Qatar, and one of my buddy was able to come. My ex-wife she came, but she couldn't find a role there. The other person that was in our group didn't make the transition, and it was crazy because I felt like in Qatar I just couldn't feel any of God's favor on my life, and I got to a point where I said, "Why is this?" And I feel like what it was really I was supposed to go to Kuwait. Mm-hmm. Now, at the end of the day, I think everything worked out for my good, and I think that God has a way of, still having a kind of a author role in our lives, even though the story is being written in a way that we don't see it happening as it's happening. Yep. So I think it still worked out the way it was supposed to, but that was a moment where, or that was a time in my life where I'd heard the voice of God and still did something that was not in exact step with what I was ordered to do.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's a very interesting point. It sounds a lot like Jonah when he runs from Nineveh. Mm-hmm. His calling in Nineveh. He runs away, and you know the story of Jonah.
Yeah, I think that's what's so interesting to me is how the way you're telling your story is oftentimes how I hear many people tell their stories too. So it's really interesting to see the same stories in a general context be told that way too.
Yeah.
Think about when Jesus' father Joseph, right? Mm-hmm. He's got pregnant wife, and God has kind of given him instructions, and he's like, well, they're killing babies in Egypt, right? So why would I go there? Yeah. And ultimately, Joseph makes a decision that's kind of contrary to what he was instructed to do, but yet and still it was written that Jesus would be a Nazarene, right? So it still worked out according to what God had already authored. Yep. But there's a learning process that we have to go through, or some of us go through, where we still have to see that things can work out, that we're not perfect. You know what I mean? God is, but we're going to make mistakes here and there. Even when you think, oh, this is the moment where you do not make a mistake.
Yeah.
This is the one time you don't want to mess up.
Exactly.
And sometimes we do, but God has us because it's all about where our heart is. I think he's a discerner of the heart.
Yeah. And maybe the story was never that you were supposed to go to Kuwait. The story was you were supposed to go to Doha, so you would have learned the lesson of obedience.
Yeah, right.
That's much more powerful than any time you could have spent in Kuwait.
I believe so. I wouldn't have it any other way.
Absolutely. And from the experience that you've shared with me, that's incredible. That's incredible. And that's like when I tried to go to Asia the first time, and I was gung-ho to get to China, and I got to Canada before I realized I didn't have a visa. And I was 10 minutes away from boarding a flight to Beijing, and I got that tap. Wow. I get a tap on my shoulder. Like you said, God speaks to you. I get a tap every once in a while. And this was one of those things. I don't know why, but I walked up to the Air Canada desk, and I said, you made an announcement a little bit earlier about a visa. I just wanted to make sure everything was okay. And they flipped through my passport, and they were like, you don't have a visa. And they said I snuck into Canada.
Wow.
Like, they should have caught you in Atlanta. And I said, okay, well, you were going to let me board the flight. What would have happened had I boarded that flight? And they said, do you really want to know? I said, yeah. They said, you would have spent 13 hours on a flight to Beijing excited about your trip. That would have never happened. Yeah, you would have been incarcerated.
Wow.
You would have been questioned. and you would have been sent home on your own dime and blacklisted from the country for a period of time.
That is amazing.
Instead, I went and talked to the concierge desk, having this feeling of
That tap.
unreal comfort.
Go talk to this person.
Why would I feel comfortable after something like that? But I felt comfortable. Walked up to the concierge desk. 45 minutes later, after a couple of phone calls, she says, "Mr. Winters, you must be the luckiest person on earth." And I said, "I don't know who your source is, but mine's telling me something a little bit different."
Well, I think that what you did was you faced your challenge instead of running away from it. In that situation, we have a tendency as people sometimes to go in the opposite direction of where we see trouble, right? But by you having the courage to just follow your instinct, because sometimes your gut will tell you to do something that you're like, well, if I do this, will I get in trouble? Or if I do this, will this make the situation worse?
Yep.
But you faced it.
Yeah.
Went
even one step further, right? I was never supposed to go to China, and the proof was that the lady that came up and told me I was the luckiest person alive, she said, "My manager just told us that it's our fault for even letting you into Canada. We're paying for your hotel room tonight here in Toronto, your dinner, your breakfast, and we have you the last seat on the next flight out to Hong Kong, which is your third stop. You'll just have to spend 5 extra days in Hong Kong and then pick back up where you left off."
Wow.
And during that 5 days, I had the weirdest experiences. Ladies would just happen to buy my lunch, or I would meet somebody and I'd be able to share my testimony with them. And I call them icing days. It was the cake, but it was those extra days that I spent in Hong Kong. That's exactly where God wanted me to be.
Wow.
I thought I needed to be in China. He thought I needed to be in Hong Kong. And so I went to Hong Kong. It wasn't how I planned it.
Right.
Just like it wasn't how you planned it.
Exactly.
But we ended up where we were supposed to end up.
That's interesting.
Which is, man, you have God's favor on you. You can tell. You can tell when people have it on them and when people don't, when you're combobulated or discombobulated. And I like to think of it as an aircraft, just because we're pilots. You have your instruments. Well, if you trust your instruments, you're going to know if what you're doing up there is right or wrong.
Yeah.
You know if your turn is coordinated or not. You know if you're going a little too fast and the wings start to shake, but trust your instruments. Do you feel like you have almost an instrument panel?
I do.
That you look at? And what are those?
I really do. First of all, there's this really, once people understand, I think, faith as a concept, right? Even religion as a concept. And I think that when it comes to favor, that term is either misinterpreted, misunderstood, misused. I think you have to truly have God's favor to really understand what that means, what it feels like when you have it, and what it feels like when you don't. Because some think that favor is automatic, that it comes with being a part of the faith. I personally disagree. I think favor comes with being tapped into your purpose. When you're trying to do what God has told you to do, or when you're trying to be what God has created you to be, then favor comes into your life, because now the universe is conspiring on your behalf, because your success is very important for the kingdom.
Yep.
And I think that favor is sometimes gets, just, I think, misdefined. In terms of an instrument panel, I think that a lot of times what I found for myself is that as my spirit has grown, as my spirit has matured, even though it has a long way to go, because this is an ongoing process. But what I found is that the closer I get to my personal understanding of myself and God and what that relationship entails, the stronger or the more accurate my instrument panels become. And a lot of times that means removing the things that are in between or perceived to be in between me and God. Sometimes that can be for people religion. They can, they may feel like, okay, God is in the sky and I'm way down here. And the only way for me to, communicate with God is I need some person or something to serve as an intercessor or whatever. I truly believe that God is omnipresent. I believe God is right here, everywhere I go. So if God is right here, if God is right here right now, then nothing is technically in between God and myself.
Yep.
And I think as I began to really understand that for myself, it helped me to be more in tune with what's happening in the spirit around me and within me.
That's good. That's good. I agree with you.
Honestly, I think that's the most well said I've had. I completely agree with all points on that respect. I think it's important to talk about religion and faith in that context so that people really understand what the difference is. I think we've talked about it a couple of times this week already. And I use the story, you'll need a boat to cross the river, but when you get to the other side, you don't carry the boat around with you. It becomes useless at that point, and it's only holding you back from doing what you need to do on the other side of the river.
That's very good. Very good.
So that hit home with me the way you said that too, and that's the way I think about it as well.
Absolutely. Well, that was the whole point of Jesus's life, was to remove that boundary, that wall in between, that we could have direct contact.
Yep.
And fantastic. That's a fantastic point. As far as your writing goes, because I'm very interested in your writing, you write poetry. Tell us more about that.
Well, poetry has been a very important part of how I express myself since I was about 16 years old. Excuse me. So during that time, I actually was challenged by a young lady who I went to high school with. In high school, I always would, even though I was a class clown, I was kind of a knucklehead. I was still really good with writing. So people would come and ask me to help them with their essays and assignments and things like that. And so this young lady, she said, I dare you to write a poem. And so I wrote a poem for her. And it was, I used the word corny, but it was definitely the early stages in my writing.
Right.
But that sparked something in me that has not gone away.
Yep.
And the thing that has changed the most in my poetry has been the audience. Initially, I wrote the first one for her. After that, for years, I just wrote the poetry for myself. It was just me expressing to me, Yeah. And once my friends started to kind of get wind of that I was doing this, they said, man, you should go and you should share this. Like go to one of the poetry places and get on stage and share this. And so they talked me into it, and it became not only did I write it, I also would share it, and the audience changed. And when the audience changed, I think that's a big part of when the reason for me writing changed. It became more, it became deliberately for motivation. It was to motivate people. And motivation for the masses, that's the name of my books, but it's also sort of the central theme of my life, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
That came about when I was about 21 years old, and I had spent time in my life in and out of jail, bouncing around from job to job, hanging around with guys who we would get together and do things that were bad, so to speak.
Yeah.
But this whole time I'm writing poetry, and I had put the poetry in composition notebooks, and they started getting worn. And so I said, well, I might as well type these poems up, save them, so that way if anything ever happens to these physical books, I've still got my poetry.
Yeah.
And as I began to type the words, I'm having to actually dissect every line, every word, every letter, every comma, and the more I was doing this, it started to motivate me. I'm literally still living with my parents as an adult, in and out of jail. And my life had very little direction. And as I started just going through and doing this, there was this process that came alive in me. And I was motivated by my own words first. I was the first person to get motivated. Mm-hmm. And when I realized how motivational it was, that's when God revealed to me my purpose in life. It is to motivate the masses.
That's good.
And that's how that all came about. And ever since then, my life has had direction. Yeah. It's gone different places, and I've seen different things. But the overall direction has not changed from motivation for the masses.
That's good. That's powerful. Wow.
I think that process is really powerful. I think that process can be very powerful. I mean, I know me and Hamilton write a lot sometimes, not as much as we used to, but but then reviewing that and then having someone that is also doing the same thing, going through the same process with you, so you're also challenging them to give you their perspective on what they just wrote. So then you have to sort of within yourself find mm-hmm. what perspective that really was. Why did you really write that? What were you thinking about? Mm-hmm. It just didn't come out of nowhere when you sit down and just think about it.
Yeah.
And I find empowerment from that. I find going back to the source and finding that contact being very empowering and then sharing that with mm-hmm. other people. It's just been very useful to do that process and talk about it with other people, and having this podcast I think has been the next level of manifestation to that process as well. So
absolutely, that was my point that I was going to make, which is if you can find somebody that you can confide in. What helped us was the Apple Notes app. Mm-hmm. And if you add someone to a note, you can see them in real time. It's like Google Docs. Mm-hmm. And so if I'm up at 12:30 at night typing a story or a poem or whatever, we used to write like every day. Mm-hmm. And with as busy as we've become, we don't write as much, which is a shame. But I could see him writing in real time. He could see me writing in real time. And the point that I'm trying to make is I've never written anything that I've regretted writing, but I've never not written something that I wish I would have written and not regretted it.
Gotcha.
Does that make sense?
Oh, it makes perfect sense. If I can kind of piggyback on what you're saying,
absolutely.
I think that it's almost like have you heard the saying, you can't win if you don't play, type of thing. Right. Same concept.
Exactly.
If you don't if you don't capture that thought, and you wake up the next day and you're like, what was I? How did I word that?
It's gone.
It's gone. And as a person who enjoys sharing thoughts, or a person who is passionate about, empowerment through that writing process, you're right. You're going to regret it if you don't do it. And on the flip side, I agree that whenever you write, even if what you write maybe like for me, I found that when I look at my early writings, some of the stuff I wrote, I don't even agree with anymore.
Yeah.
It's so true.
What was I thinking when I wrote that? My mind was in a different place. But it's like a Kodak moment in my development.
It's a time capsule.
You can see the process. Yeah.
And that's so for motivation for the masses, for my books, that's what they are. Every year is a new chapter. Mm-hmm. So it starts with 98, and I'm writing it in volumes. And what it is a poetic autobiography.
That's good.
So it's literally, it's not the story of my life. Mm-hmm. It's the story of the life of my poetry.
Yep.
Yeah.
Which means that when you read 1998, which is the first chapter, and you progress through year after year, you should see some development, some growth, some change, because that's what was happening in my life as well. And it was reflected in the words that I wrote.
That's good.
And I think that, writing is extremely important. And something else that you said that I heard from both of you guys is that I've heard not writing as much right now as I used to, been extremely busy. Mm-hmm. I will encourage you with this. I remember when I came back from working overseas, and I really was going hard in my technology career. And technology, that and being married, seemed to be working together to just drain my creativity. I was putting so much of my energy into building a business, learning new technologies, being a good husband, that some kind of way it just took away, or it felt like the desire or the passion for writing was going away. And with motivation for the masses being my purpose in life, I'm starting to go through
neglecting your whole purpose.
Right.
You're
That's what I
starting
thought.
to see it now.
That's what I thought. But what happened was, I went to my mom. I said, "Ma, it's like I haven't been writing. It's like I can't even write anymore." And it was really bothering me. And she said, "You are still motivating the masses. The medium or the methodology of how you're doing it may have changed for now.
Yeah, the vessel.
But you're still motivating the masses with just the way you're living as an example. You're a positive person. You're a leader." And when she told me that, it gave me some comfort. But I really got comfort when, over time, I've seen it come back around. So now, these days, even in the midst of me being extremely busy, building companies, having a lot of people I have to account for in my life, but now I'm writing probably just as much as I wrote at the height of my writing.
Yeah.
And it goes up and down. So
It's all
I would
cyclical.
just encourage you to say, hey, look, you may not be writing that much right now, but don't worry about it. Keep pursuing what you're pursuing. Keep doing what you're doing. And the writing will either come back around, or it'll just transform and mutate into something that is even better than what you could imagine.
That's powerful.
And that's how I really felt about this podcast that Hamilton started, is that was his reach. And then it wasn't that he wasn't writing anymore. It was that he was speaking in real time about what he was writing. And then, that attracted people like you to come and speak with him on the podcast. He convinced me to do something that I haven't been comfortable with until now in my life, which is speaking about my experiences with other people, and especially over a microphone where potentially, hopefully, millions of people hear about it. So
Exactly.
it's just that one action sometimes from someone that sparks other people to take those actions in their lives, and then you get this collaborative experience, and you get to review it and share, and then recognize that everyone went through the same process the whole time anyways. And and that's kind of cool. What's cool to me is, and that's where I get the feeling talking in this room, is seeing that everyone is going through the same process, and that we're all at different levels, and that's because of the choices we made and the actions that we take. So
I think that's one of the things that join us at the hip as people in humanity. I think that when you look at the diversification of peoples in the world, we all have what some identify and some don't as those things that really at the end of the day make us all the same, right?
Right.
Whether it be, we all are composed of, blood and bone, we have a heart, or whatever the case may be, right? But with love, all of us have a soul. All of us have a need for love. But we all also are going through a process.
Yep.
And everybody's process may have different details, but it doesn't matter who you connect with in the world. You could be over in Hong Kong. I could be over in Doha. Whoever I come in contact with, I guarantee they're also going through a process.
Yep.
That process, that journey is what joins us together.
It's the human
It's a common
experience.
ground.
It's the human experience.
And like you were talking about earlier, I think that's, to me, is what I would say is what I recognize in people. And you can kind of see people who are going through that process and know that they're going through that process, and can recognize it in other people. And you can kind of tell the people that aren't really on a process, or aren't really trying to to do better things in their life.
Well, they might not be aware. I know a lot of people.
Exactly,
There
true.
are unlocked people and there are locked people.
Mm-hmm.
And you come in contact with them every single day. You can tell if somebody's locked or if they're unlocked.
Yep.
You can look at somebody that is aware that their situation is really good or not what they want it to be.
Mm-hmm.
And then is that person trying to get better? Or are they trying to capitalize on their good situation? Or do they just go through life and just go through the motions? Some people live their entire life just going through the motions, which is a shame. But it's not my life. I only get my life to live. There are 7 billion other people living their lives. I want to thank both of you for making incredible points on you saying that your writing is a vessel. And although your vessel might not be writing at this point, it might be something else. And you, Russell, for making that connection. So I went back in my notes. And this was when we were typing a lot, like a lot.
Mm-hmm.
The last week in October, I wrote this. I had just written just straight content. I had this plethora of content. Quit trying to type. Stop trying to force it. You've noticed that the thoughts aren't flowing as freely as they have over the last several weeks. Why? You've been given content. You have enough. Go do something with it. Share it, disseminate it, spread it, and you'll get more. Until then, don't expect more. The next week is the first episode of Inneractions.
Yeah.
The next week.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I quit writing as much. But you know what I started doing? Videos.
Mm-hmm.
And after the videos weren't as effective, it's not that they weren't effective. Something was more effective, and that was a podcast.
Mm-hmm.
So we started a podcast, and here we are, season 2 of the podcast. And we have plenty of content, not anything that I could create, but I have wonderful friends in my life, like you, John, that are willing to come give me an hour of their time to share your content with me. And man, that's powerful. That's awesome.
Absolutely.
Thank you for
Absolutely.
making those points. Because it was bothering me, just like it was bothering you. Why am I not writing as much?
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that I started to do with my sister, she is one of the most talented writers, poets that I've ever met.
Yeah, it's amazing.
I've read Russell some of her work. She started a note with me because I told her that I started a note with Russell, and it was just titled Poems, and she wrote me one poem. And I saw it as a challenge, just like that girl in high school that dared you to write a poem.
Mm-hmm.
So I wrote her one back. And throughout the last few months, I'll just see a little yellow dot next to that note. That means she edited the poems note. And I'll look at it, and it's just, man, she knocks it out of the park every time. And she's much deeper than I am. But I'll write something that's really good for me, and she's super impressed by it. But finding someone that's, I don't think that you would go out there and call yourself a poet.
I would call myself a motivator. If I had to just choose one word, a motivator.
But you don't have to be a poet to write poetry.
You don't.
Right?
I think that what I'm trying to show through the book, through Motivation for the Masses, is that life is poetry. Whether we are poets or not,
That's good.
everybody's life is worthy of being captured, analyzed, read, not for the purpose necessarily of critique, but for the purpose of just learning from it.
Yeah.
Everybody's life is worthy of being brought in between the front cover and back cover of a book and being shared with somebody else, because somebody's going to be able to relate and identify. And there is a beauty in sharing, whether it's sharing food, sharing music, sharing poetry, sharing your life journey. There is a beauty that just comes from sharing that's very mutualistic for the giver and the recipient.
Yep.
That's good. We talked about environment. And this is the environment that we like to do our podcast in.
Mm-hmm.
With your point to your poems throughout your life, I've never thought about writing an autobiography that's not an autobiography, but simply stories throughout your life. That, to me, is a much more approachable way to go about it. And I think you see more about an environment, not by describing the environment, but by looking at the fruits of what comes out of that environment. When I read your book, which I appreciate you bringing 2 copies for me, that was one of the nicest gifts anybody's ever given me. So thank you so much. That's
You're
very thoughtful.
welcome. Very welcome.
When I dive into that, I have no doubt that I'll be able to see more about the environment that you were in when I read those poems and see the differences from one another than I ever would getting you to describe your time in Doha, or
Absolutely.
your time in Iraq, or your time in somewhere else.
Here's something very interesting thing that I've only recently discovered. You mentioned seeing the fruits of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
The environment plus the story and seeing the fruits of it. By writing this almost in real time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it started out with me writing about 98, going back, looking at my old stuff, my old poems, my old story. That's the way it started. But now that I've written the second volume ends in 2009. So now I'm about to start writing 2010 and bring it current. But this fascinating thing I found is that in doing it that way, I actually get to control the narrative. I actually get to be the master of my destiny consciously through the process. So now I find myself making decisions. And when I find myself at the fork in the road, or I find myself having to deal with something, now I'm asking myself, well, how is this going to read? How is this going to affect my story? I want my story to be one of greatness.
Yep.
I want my story to be motivational. So when I come to a hard decision, sometimes I may want to take the easy route.
Yep.
But I'm like, well, if I go the easy route, does that actually
Would I
help
want to
my
read
story?
that?
Yeah.
Would I want to read that? If that was put in the movie, would
Right.
that be a highlight, or would that be a part where you stand up and go take a leak?
I'll give you an example. So the Super Bowl was here in Atlanta, right?
Yeah.
So I was fortunate enough to have tickets to go to the game. So it came to a decision of, well, the teams I wanted to see were not playing in the game. So I said, well, do I sell these tickets or do I go to the game? And I really didn't have much interest in the game. But I'm thinking to myself, I've never been to a Super Bowl. And how often does a Super Bowl come to my city?
Yeah.
Yep.
And if I'm writing the story of my life, what's more interesting, going to the Super Bowl or selling the tickets?
Sell the tickets.
So I went.
Good point.
And me going is something that I can be trying to motivate somebody 20 years from now. And it may be that being at a Super Bowl, watching Tom Brady win what I think is probably his last Super Bowl, but seeing that from my own eyes may actually be a bigger inspiration to someone else than just selling some tickets online.
Absolutely.
That's yeah. Wow. That's awesome. How can we get in touch with you?
It's pretty straightforward because most of my social media is just my name, which is John F. Dilworth, JOHNFDILWORTH. John F. Dilworth is my Instagram, it's Facebook, it's LinkedIn. I think it's even on Twitter.
Got you.
So, yeah.
Cool. I know a lot of people. This is one of the best episodes that I could have asked for. I see Russell over there nodding his head. This is.
I don't think I've stopped nodding my head in a while.
I know. It's been incredible. I knew it would be, but my grandfather's always said expectations are just premeditated disappointments. I expected this to be great, but I didn't set you up for failure, and you blew me out of the water.
Man, you guys have really, I think that this day going forward is going to be, there's a spiritual energy that I can take with me to finish out some of the stuff that has to be done today. And I'm looking forward to going back and really closing my eyes and just listening to this again. Some of the things that you guys have said to me has been very enlightening, very inspiring.
Absolutely. Well, we thank you for being here. And one thing before we close, on Monday this past week, I got the chance to speak to a high school in Louisiana. And at the very end, I looked at him and I said, I'm looking at an auditorium filled with people that have incredible purpose, massive purpose. But there are two things that you need to do to find it. One, ask God to show it to you and challenge him. Challenge him to give you a massive, massive purpose. If you're good with taking something less than the best, That's a decision you have to make. That's between you and God. Challenge God to show you his purpose for your life. And 2, have the courage to step up to the plate, to swing the bat, and to knock it out of the park. Mm-hmm. And I think that if anybody has come on our show before that those 2 things have described, challenging God to show you his purpose for your life and knocking it out of the park, it's John F. Dilworth. And if no other group has been motivated by you, it's this group right here.
Absolutely. I love it.
It's this group right here.
That makes me smile, man, ear to ear.
So you are a friend of the show. I'm honored to be your friend, and I thank you for coming on the show today. Is there anything else that you wanted to add before we close?
No, man, just thank you for having me. Hopefully one day you guys will see fit to bring me back around, and I would be at your service.
Absolutely. Without a doubt. Well, you're always welcome where we are. So thank you to everybody listening in. We sure are glad that you joined us today. Go out there, motivate the masses, and love on somebody today. Thanks, folks.